So, first of all, let me say good Monday to everyone. We are moving. When I say we, the Making of Men Leadership Program and Believing, we've been doing this for some years. And it is now time for us to look at how do we reach more people? How do we make sure that our community is receiving all of the necessary tools and information that we need? One of the focuses I have had over the years, very unapologetically, have been black boys. Years ago, when we looked at how do we rebuild the walls in our community, how do we transform the community and families, that was a huge elephant to eat. We did something called Operation Nehemiah. That was a great learning lesson for us. Today I have joining me for a Making of Men conversation that I promise you will be very vulnerable, very transparent, very informative. My good friend, my great friend, Dr. Kevin McPherson, and I can call him friend because he has stood by me in some difficult times. He has not fed into some of the many negative things that were said about me. Many people don't know this, but let me share some information with you. Dr. Kevin McPherson and I, back, maybe close to 20 years ago, maybe, we met every week, once a week, for an entire year, working on something called Operation Nehemiah. He was schooling me. He was my mentor. Dr. McPherson has a couple of PhDs. I knew my strength, and I knew that surrounding myself with people who were smarter than me was very important. Dr. McPherson and I sat down for that year and began looking at a strategy, a plan for how do we engage, how do we build, how do we empower the black community. And here we are in 2020, y'all. And much of what we talked about back then, that the truth of the matter is, Doc, many people rejected. They struggled with because it seemed radical at the time. But now, looking at the situation, it's not radical at all. It only really makes sense, right?
Makes sense.
And so today, we're going to have a very real and transparent conversation about some of the issues in the black community, and more specifically, looking at the impact of trauma on black men and how that impacts the black community, black families, and the mass incarceration machine. So, Doc, why don't you, first of all, just tell the people and give folks a little bit about Care for Change and what it is that you've been doing for well over 20 years with Care for Change, the relationship you have with the Department of Mental Health and all of that. Let the folks know that, a little bit about yourself.
Well, in 27 years, we were founded in May 1993, myself and another brother, Dr. Long, who's now at OU, and another brother, Ricky Keys. Back in 1993, we were concerned. Remember when everybody used to hang out on 23rd, and unfortunately, we had some drive-by shootings, and so we actually sat down then as graduate students at the University of Oklahoma, working on our doctorates, and we created Care for Change, an organization that we thought could affect change with adolescents. Actually, CARE stands for Community Adolescent Rehabilitation Effort. That's a lot, but Community Adolescent rehabilitation effort, because we knew even back then that if you were going to affect change in the community, you had to work with the young people, you had to work with the adolescents. Now, over the years, because of necessity, 27 years, we now have contracts from the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health. We have a contract for providing substance abuse and addiction services. We have a certification for behavioral health. Actually, we were certified excellent with behavioral health, but we don't have a contract for behavioral health, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So for 27 years, we've provided services from drug court to working with adolescents. We've always worked mostly with probation and parole, and so actually one of the reasons that we're here today with Making Amends is that we're looking at the process of rebranding Care for Change. We had started the process before COVID-19, but now because of COVID-19, it's a necessity. And that is, it used to be Care for Change was for people who were in the criminal justice system. That's where our referrals came from, was the criminal justice system. And so what we're trying to do now is, first of all, a lot of people in the criminal justice system did not want treatment. They only came because they were sent to us. And so in the last year, what we've decided to do is how can we redirect some of the resources that Care for Change gets to reach out to the community before people get in trouble, before people get involved in the criminal justice system. And so that's a matter of us changing the way we do business, and it means we have to have new staffing patterns, we have to have a new referral system. We're still gonna work with our contract, the other entities such as the Department of Corrections. We're still gonna take all those referrals, but we need to enlarge who we help to the community. I say go from maybe bring down your Department of Corrections and bring up your community to where they're 50-50. Right now they're 97% to about 3%. Pretty much everyone Care for Change has traditionally served has been from the criminal justice system. And so, and one of the reasons was this, is that you had to, well, it was just the way our contract started, let me say that, but you also had to have a substance abuse issue to be qualified to get services at Care for Change. And so with like what we're dealing with now with COVID-19, I've got a lot of people, particularly African-American men, but a lot of people who don't fit the criteria. They're working, they have jobs, or they don't have Sooner Care, and so they don't have a way to pay for those services, and we don't have a state contract. So if you don't have a substance abuse issue, we couldn't help you. We had to try to send you or refer you to someplace else. And so that was unfortunate, because during COVID, lots of people started calling and they didn't use drugs, and that's a good thing, by the way. It's not a bad thing, but they said, listen, man, I was diagnosed with depression years ago, but I had been dealing with it, but this COVID has made it to where I have some issues. And unfortunately, if we didn't get some change in our funding system, we couldn't serve those people. And so I reached out to our Senator George Young, I will say that, who has worked in the drug court system for years. And he's a person that understands Department of Mental Health and the services that we provide. And so I talked to him about the fact that a lot of people did not qualify for services, and all it would take was just basically to allow some of the services that we are funded for to be used for this. And so he was able to work with the Department of Mental Health, and we're now going to be providing, well, we are providing services, outreach services, meaning we're going out talking to people. We're going to be appearing on programs like this. We're saying to everyone, but particularly to African American males, which is why we're here with you, because unapologetically you've been talking about African American males for years. And so the idea is that we've been suffering from historical trauma just based on being an African American male in America, based on all of the systems, be it the criminal justice system, be it the educational system, be it the overall social system. And so long before COVID-19 hit, we were dealing with these things, and then COVID hit, which made everything 10 times worse than it was.
So Doc, let me ask you this before you keep going. Define for us trauma.
Well, I can't define for you trauma, because trauma can be different for every person, but basically it's something that happens to you that has an altering effect on your life. Now, we know of the traumas like child abuse and sexual abuse and those types of things, but no, Steve, trauma can be reliving something that was brought back to your attention based on something that you saw, something that you had buried. I'm gonna tell you something. For me, watching the execution of George Floyd traumatized me.
Okay.
I would,
Me
Steve,
too.
it messed me up.
Me too.
I watching that, and then unfortunately, I watched it one more time. I won't watch it anymore. But I watched it one more time, and I got a clip somehow from somebody from overseas, and it was like 8 minutes. And I watched that, and once again, I was just drained.
So talk about how, as a black man, as a black boy, watching a white police officer literally kneel down and take the breath out of this man. How does that affect a black man, a black boy? I'm just being we understand that trauma can affect everybody. We understand that. But right now we're talking about as black men and black boys. I know how it affected me as a black man when I watched it. I took it personal on a whole nother level, meaning of the black boys that I have spoken to, young black boys, some of the things they have said to me really surprised me, which said to me, man, we're going to have to be intentional when these young men go back into school to address the George Floyd situation.
Well, because it makes you angry. It makes you angry, it makes you frustrated. You don't understand. Young man asked me, why would he do that? 11-year-old boy said, Dr. McPherson, why would he do that? Because they don't understand systemic racism. They don't understand the history of the Ku Klux Klan being in law enforcement. And these are historical facts, you all. I'm not making any of this up. And so for them, they have these feelings, and here's what happens, Steve, they don't know how to feel. I know it hurts. And so how am I supposed to feel when I don't understand why anybody would kill anybody? But why did he do that to this man? And that man looks like me. And then, of course, it's not only the children, it's the parents, because all of us who have children, I hope you've talked to your sons and your daughters. And so unfortunately, when we try to educate them, to protect them, sometimes that creates more trauma, because now they really become afraid, because you have to tell your son it could happen to him at any moment. It's unfortunate, but that's a reality being a black man in America, is that it could happen at any moment. And you don't have to be doing anything wrong.
And what have we found that when black boys don't deal with those feelings of hurt like that, what does that normally manifest into?
Well, it's going to come out. Again, it's going to come out in some way. Generally, it's going to come out in a negative way, because you haven't learned to express your feelings, so you become short. You don't want to deal with people. Sometimes you use other attributes. If I can't communicate well, I can physically get you to do what I want you to do. I might not can't. You might be smarter than me. That's how they say it sometimes. But I'm physically stronger than you. And so everyone's going to use their strengths that they have to win, because we're such a competitive group. Black men, we're competitive.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to let you best me. And so if you outdo me, maybe in using your words, I might have to go physical with you. Because you remember that when you was young, you can't whoop me. That used to be what we would say sometimes. The answer to everything was, you can't whoop me. Well, but that's not a healthy way to live your life, is based on who you can whoop and physically, and that's also gonna get you put in jail. And so the idea would be is that, how do I learn to communicate my feelings in a manner that's not gonna make me feel that I'm less than? You know what I said? That I'm less than.
Right.
You see, that's the problem is I can talk, but when I talk and I don't maybe talk the way y'all want me to talk, or I can't get it from here out to here, I start to feel some kind of way.
That's right.
Then I think you looking at me funny, Steve.
That's right.
You calling me stupid.
That's right.
You see, and none of this is really going on.
That's right.
But it's in my head because of what I'm dealing with, because of my issues of self-esteem sometimes, or things that are going on in my environment.
So let's talk about when that begins, when that issue is not dealt with as a boy and you become a man, and that turns into adult insecurities, adult self-destructive behavior, adult not willing to stay in a marriage and learning how to fight fairly. One of the things we were talking about before we got started was, when I was married, I didn't know how to argue and fight with my wife fairly. That was one of the things that ruined our marriage, because as a black boy, I was never taught how to deal with my disappointment, my frustration. I was simply taught, as you said, that when I'm angry and mad, I lash out. And if I don't physically touch you, I can touch you with my tongue. With the words that I say, I can cut you that way. So let's talk about how, and I know watching George Floyd and watching this COVID situation, again, I want to be very vulnerable and transparent. I found myself drinking more than I normally drink, Doc.
Well, and it's not only you. if you look at the numbers, alcohol use is up, marijuana use is up, because all of those things, here's what I would say, people drink to change the way they feel. You know what I just said? People use substances, mind-altering substances, to alter their mind. I want to feel a certain way. So, Steve, here would be the thing I would say is that, but why are you drinking? What's going on that's making you drink more or smoke more or argue more or fight more? What's going on with you that's making you respond to these life situations in the way that you are?
Do you understand how uncomfortable that thought is for me as a man, for me to sit down and do introspection and admit to myself, Steve, you drinking more than you normally drink. And I start feeling that weakness. And that's the one thing that I can tell you as a man, as I've worked with boys for over 20 years, that they don't want to feel weak. And that's one of the reasons why we never truly address the issues that we have as men. That then turns into self-destructive behavior, which then impacts our families, our marriages. We can't stay married.
And people say, what's wrong with Steve?
That's right.
Why he act like that? What's wrong with Mike?
That's right.
What's wrong with Kevin?
That's right.
That's the question. But if people were to really look into it, the answer is right there.
It's right there.
You see, but Steve, you've been blessed, and I've been blessed, we give thanks, to live long enough to be mature enough and to get enough wisdom to start to be able to have that introspection. I call it internalizing what you're feeling, so when it gets inside of you from here to your heart and then out of your heart, springs life. And so how do you so we're blessed, but I was 35, when I was 30, when I was 20, I didn't know.
That's right.
And I didn't know because, like you, I did not have that person. Now, for me to say that there weren't men around me, there were some coaches.
Yeah, me too.
And there were some pastors in my life, actually female pastors mostly, but there were people in my life, but they were not in a position culturally. Let me say that a lot of my people were not African American. So they didn't know how to teach me. Now, I saw modeled stuff.
Sure.
But they didn't know how. And so can you imagine trying to figure this whole, I mean, you can because you did it.
Absolutely.
Trying to figure out maturity as a man. That's why a lot of brothers that I'm working with now, Steve, are telling me that they think they're depressed.
Right. So,
Okay.
I'm glad you went there. So one of the things you and I have talked about since we've met, and you actually turned me on to problem called solution. And you actually helped me understand better mental health, the difference in mental health and mental illness, and how if I don't take care of my mental health, it can lead to mental illness, right?
Exactly.
And so Doc, share a little bit about, because I've had to share with many boys who stand up in my Making of Men program, and they'll use the word depressed, right? They'll say, I'm depressed. And I said, no, son, what happened to you is you're disappointed by some life circumstances. That's very different than depression.
And
so
even is depression the same as anxiety or bipolar disorder? Now, I won't go into all of that, but if there's something called the DSM-5, the Statistical Manual of Diagnosis, but it says that how many criteria have to be present in you for you to be determined as being depressed. And then the question becomes, if they are present, how is it affecting your life? And so people got to understand, depression is not just one thing, I'm depressed. You could have different levels of depression. You could have post-traumatic stress disorder. You could be dealing with bipolar disorder. You could have high levels of anxiety. I really hate that I have a young sister. She's a PhD clinical psychologist out of Houston. I've been giving her to my clients. I'll try to get there for next time, but she does weekly podcasts every Monday to explain mental health issues in regular people's terms. And she says what is depression versus what is anxiety. And so here's what I'm going to say. Most of the brothers that I'm meeting with, Steve, that have come to me, they are suffering from symptoms of depression.
Symptoms of depression.
And no different when you get symptoms of a cold or symptoms of something else. What do you do with those symptoms? If you don't do anything with those symptoms, it gets worse.
It's worse.
It grows. But if you identify the symptom, I never want to get out of bed at night. I never wake up on time. I'm just feel like I'm unhappy. Okay, well, does that mean that there's something else going on that's causing these feelings? And so now I'm going to switch into cognitive behavioral therapy. Because see, what we don't realize is that we say you're thinking, determines your feeling. It is that feeling that determines your action and your behavior. We get it as black men, we catch it at the feeling. I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm pissed off, I'm hungry, I'm tired. And usually when you get that feeling, there's actually a response for it, but you don't really understand why sometimes what thinking caused you to feel that way.
So Doc, well, you've gave me a book and we've been reading it, but it's one of the things that I built the Making of Men Leadership program on, because one of the things that I understood is that we need to give people, black boys that become black men, the resiliency tools necessary to navigate the larger society, to navigate those moments of disappointment, those moments of despair and brokenness that we know we're all going to encounter. One of the things that I have found in talking to men that are my age, I'm 49, I'll be 50 this year, that there are some men who are 49 that have not transitioned from maleness, from boyhood to manhood. Help me understand, how is it that a man can get stuck in boyhood?
Well, think of it this way. Your environment oftentimes determines. Well, I literally was having a session with a young brother the other day. He said, "Doc, I know I'm developmentally delayed because I was in prison for 15 years." Ooh. He said it. I know that I'm delayed because I was in prison for 15 years and I wasn't learning. I was reading, I was learning, but I'm delayed. This brother is 40 something now. He just got out, but he understands that he's developmentally delayed. See, here's the thing. There's something literally called mildly retarded or developmentally delayed. That does not mean that that means you're not on level. And I'm not on level, if you want to use a sports analogy or whatever, I'm not on level because I don't have the skills. My coach hasn't taught me yet. I don't know, I haven't put in enough work and practice or whatever. So think of it in terms of my level of my mindset. And so if I can learn to identify my thinking before I got to the feeling, then I might can change the action that I'm gonna be acting on. See, I know I'm feeling angry and I know you pissing me off, and so instead of hitting you, I'm gonna walk away. Steve, I'm gonna give you one. Yeah, she's at a strap. I was at the Dollar General. Steve, the Dollar General the other day, I walk in and there's a sister in front of me and she's pregnant, nice sister, so I speak to her and I'm in the line. And for whatever reason, Steve, the white lady behind the counter screamed at me and said, "Give her 6 feet. Who do you think you are?" I'm like, what? And it took every skill I had, Steve, to respond in a way that was not gonna cause me a bigger problem. Cause wait a minute, you just and the sister looked, she was surprised too. What made this lady scream at a grown black man and tell me to keep 6 feet? And I was 6 feet away, but the sister was turning around talking to me. But my point was I wanted to check the lady behind the counter and I wanted to talk crazy to her because who are you to treat me that way? But then I had to get my priorities right. I was smart enough to think, oh, you feeling this way because you feel like this woman had no right to talk to you like that, and you can become aggressive with her, but what will be the outcome? How could I win that? So what I did was I said, "Thank you very much," pissed off, and walked out the door. The sister waited outside for me and said, "I don't know why she did that." You see, so if I don't have the right mindset, if I had only acted on my initial response, what I wanted to do and say to that woman, it wouldn't have ended good for me. So I had the ability to think about why I was feeling that way too, because it brought back, oh, see, this is how they treat us. This is how white people treat us. And if I'd have said, "I'm a man and you can't do this and you are F and you," first of all, that'd have been bad for me.
Right.
No matter how you look at it. But you know what I saw it as? It was a challenge for me to test my management of my emotions.
And you know, I was telling someone the other day, we were going to do a run during COVID called The Weight We Carry. And I came up with that because when I run every day, Doc, on this trail where I run at, I run past white women, and when they see me coming, they cringe. You can visibly see them get nervous and show fear. That literally frustrates me. But let me tell you what's crazy about that. I really get mad at myself for allowing that to even bother me, right? Because I understand how media and the system has portrayed black men in such a way that people, even black people, fear black men. And so part of the weight we carry, that weight can cause us, if we don't deal with it, Doc, some mental illness.
Stress.
It can cause us some anxiety.
Stress, and it's normal. Can you imagine if you come from a situation, Steve, where you want to be accepted? And like you, every time you're at the park and you see people cringe, what's wrong with me when people cringe when they see me?
Right.
What's wrong with me?
Right.
When people act that way when they see me, and unfortunately, a lot of times we start to project it onto other brothers. You see, because obviously it must be something wrong with us. Versus, you really wish she didn't cringe, but like you said, Steve, you understand why she cringed.
But here's the other part that really frustrates me as well, Doc, is that same thing happens in our classroom with black boys and white teachers, and that's one of the reasons why when you look at the suspension rate and you pull the data, it shows that more black boys are suspended compared to their white peers. And most of those teachers are normally white female teachers who write up these black boys, which plants the seed in this black. So this
self-fulfilling prophecy. This must be who I am.
Absolutely.
They're saying I'm this, but here becomes the question: where are the counter forces against that?
There it is.
See,
there it is.
Where are the counter forces against that? See, here's the deal. What if the young lady? I don't know if I can turn it on. What if the young lady, really, Steve, just like you in your marriage, doesn't know? What if this teacher, who is a nice young lady who wants to do the right thing, but just like you didn't know in your marriage, she doesn't know how to deal with this young man?
And many don't.
Well, and so the reality would be, if we just would acknowledge that and equip them with the tools necessary. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to work with making amends.
So time out. Let's go back.
Okay.
When you say if we would acknowledge that, let's talk about the we. So the we is the institution. The we is school districts and individual schools. Talk about what does that look like, the we acknowledging that?
Well, it looks like you should know them by their fruit. We would see it. For instance, let me give you a perfect example. What I've heard, and I just did a little test, what I've heard is that we're going to be online in most school districts, okay? Now, we were having issues with black boys being able to get their work done and getting their school done, and black kids before that anyway. So now you're going to put them in an online program, many of them who have mothers and fathers who will not be there to watch them, but you're going to expect them to be successful? So to me, what it would look like is that there's a problem. We know what caused the problem. It was there before COVID, but because of COVID, we've got a unique problem now.
Right.
What are some community solutions? Could we take 3 churches? Could we partner with Oklahoma City Public Schools or all the other school districts? And could they use Title I money that would go for reading and math? And could we provide services in those churches for families that did not have the support in the homes to help these kids? The money is there. It's federal money. See, that's what you would call a collaboration. So when I say we acknowledge it, let me say that an acknowledgement to me of the changing demographics of Putnam City Public Schools is the fact that you're here. Because Putnam City is not the same schools that it was when I was growing up, when I was younger. The demographics have changed, and so it seems to me like the people out here are saying, because the demographics are changing, we need to change what we're doing.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we have to give, in this time of social unrest, in this time of looking at new ways of doing education, I have to acknowledge Putnam City and their willingness to address the issues and be unapologetic in their approach to dealing with and serving black boys, particularly during this distant learning time. Because one of the things that Making of Men is doing with Putnam City, doing distance learning, is we're going to be working with those boys and their parents during this time. So not only will we be serving the boys, but we're going to be serving and engaging their parents, giving their parents the tools to work with their boys during this difficult time, giving and empowering boys to want. You talked about it, they wasn't as engaged before this. So why do we think they'll be engaged online. Well, we've come up with a plan with Making of Men and how we're going to do that. Our boys and our families are showing to be very excited right now about this. But those are the type of partnerships that are necessary for us to transform education in this country. But let me bring it closer to home. Let's talk about Oklahoma and how we are at the bottom of the freaking list when it comes to education. So, Doc.
Well, and I once again, you should know them by their fruit. What is the education system producing, particularly for our community? Overall, there's data out there. And so, Steve, let me say this, is that you talk about partnerships. The reason that I'm here today with Care for Change is that Care for Change is actually seeking partnerships with people to do exactly what you said. How do we provide caregivers? How do we provide families with healing-centered engagement strategies? Because we just admitted that you and I didn't necessarily get it, so a lot of the kids aren't going to get this from home. If they're not getting it from the institution of school, then it's going to have to come from somebody. And so when you say Making of Men is reaching out, I'm saying, well, man, Steve, if some of those families are dealing with trauma, if some of those boys need employment, some of them are dealing with anger, Care for Change is trying to partner with you. We don't want to do all the work. We can't.
And I've been referring them to you. Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying is that, okay, let me, Dr. Young, reach out to some people that were already doing the work. Because there's a lot of people that talk about what they want to do, what they're going to do. I am selectively reaching out to people that were already doing the work. How can we partner to bring these resources that we have to assist these families? Because again, there's a specific kind of dynamic even to a STEM school in Putnam City versus the STEM school in somewhere else. There's a unique mindset that a black boy has to have.
That's right.
To function in this part of town versus that part of town. There are survival skills.
That's real talk. Yes,
you see, that are different. And so that's why I like what Making of Men is doing, is that my thing would be is that if we could somehow begin to collaborate across these various different groups, and Steve Davis does a great job at this, and let's say somebody else is doing a great job at this over here, Dr. McPherson comes and says, well, are there any of you all have boys and men in the groups that you're working with, or even families that need help? And let me say this, we serve everyone. We don't just serve black men. We serve everyone, but we do have, get this, we do have some gender specific, meaning male, culturally conscious, meaning the perspective of African history, and culturally competent services, meaning we want to work with black males. We want the people to work with us to be culturally conscious, meaning you got to understand the perspective or the narrative that we're trying to give. And then we want you to be culturally competent, meaning you're not afraid, you don't cringe. You have been willing to learn the skills necessary to engage black boys. And so that's what I see you all doing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Very serious question. Is it realistic for me as a black man, as a black father, to believe that white female teachers can teach a black boy?
Well, realistic, because think about the word you asked. Is it realistic? Is your question, can a white female teach a black boy? It all depends on that teacher's skills and talents.
Oh, cool. Okay. Oh, time out. So it can be done, and at the core of that white female teacher, one of the things that I tell people that you cannot teach who you do not love. So how do you engage a white female teacher who teaches a class of black boys, and she has some fear of black boys, but she has the skills and the talent and the want to. Okay, she wants to teach them, right?
Okay, yes.
So how do we as black men, black fathers, black grandfathers, black uncles, how can we work with white female teachers, white male coaches who work with our super athletic boys, because they're so athletic, to help them better serve our boys?
Well, you have to engage. If you don't engage, there can be no progress. You have to engage. For instance, I was having an issue till you told me about her heart. See, once you told me she had a heart for it, then I began to say, okay, first thing I need to talk to her about is who are you and why are you here? This is the conversation with the teacher. Who are you and why are you here? And if she says, I'm here to teach and be an excellent teacher, then I can say, if you have these skills, you can do it. First of all, you got to understand who you are and why you're here. And do you believe that black boys can learn?
Ooh.
See, do you believe that black boys can learn? Did your psychosocial environment, what did it teach you about black boys and black men? What did you learn in your household and your family? What did you learn in college?
So let me push the question then.
Okay.
Let me push the question. So then I have to ask the question: how responsible are white teachers, white female teachers, for the mass incarceration machine that is dominating our culture, our society?
Well, what I would say is this, and I want to try to be fair to them. I think that they are simply employed in a system. And the system is designed to do what it does. They're workers. They're workers in a system. And so they may do some individual damage, but they're a part of it's a bigger issue than that. It's a systemic problem, you see. And so for them, it's a job. Some of them do it well. Some of them don't. By the way, there's white women, there's black women, there's white men, there's black men, that's everybody.
And okay, thank you, sir. So let me be fair. So it's not just a white issue, by the way, because I've met some black teachers who are horrible for black children.
Yes.
So but for the sake of the argument and the conversation, I'm saying white women because they dominate the teaching field.
Right, and so Dr. Juwanza Kunjufu talks about something called fourth grade failure syndrome.
Okay.
He talks about, when you kindergarten, first, second, cute little boy running around, but by the time you start getting about 9, 10, you start to grow. You start to develop into a young black man, and that same intimidation that you talked about, Steve, sometimes begin to bear itself out, manifest itself out when the teacher can't handle the little boy anymore because he's starting to grow up. He ain't just cute little boy anymore. He's a young adolescent black boy who's moving around, who's used to learning a certain way. He's as tall as you, so he can look you in your eye and challenge you. And so what happens is that we have to begin to look at who else can provide supplemental support if and it's true, Steve, not if, what you're saying is true in terms of the number of white women in the system. So you identify those who have the heart, like you said, and you provide them the skills and techniques to do the best job they can to be excellent. But that's also everybody. But a white woman's situation is unique to an African-American boy versus an African-American woman or an African-American male or whomever, you see. But the thing is this, heart is everything, man. You give me a person that loves children, that really, 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 really wants to make a difference in children's life, and they're willing to sacrifice some of what they learned, and they're willing to pour it into the children, man, there are skills and techniques. Here's the thing, I'm in Dr. Joy DeGrew's class now. She wrote the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder, and we're in a class called the relationship approach, the relational approach. See, the reason, Steve, you're able to do what you do with the making of men families is because you have a relationship with them. So that's what I'm saying, the relationship. So what kind of relationship are we going to create with these teachers if we know they're in that position?
Right.
And we know that they're struggling, and we know they haven't been properly trained at their colleges and institutions. And so the system, if it wanted to, could address that.
And let me tell you, glad you brought that up, because one of the things we have been doing, Making of Men, have been doing this summer is working with teachers in, actually we did trained 250 teachers around the country, some 50 here right in Putnam City North High School for that very reason, because when I start looking at how are we going to improve and empower black boys, I understood that I have to empower those white teachers who are teaching those black boys, that it was not enough for me to go into that classroom, but I had to also give those teachers who have the heart to give them the tools to work with our black boys.
And so the system is in place. You are engaged in the system. And so Care for Change comes along and says, Mr. Davis, you're working with black boys. We have some opportunities to provide some outreach services to families who are dealing with substance abuse, mental health, and addiction now. We may not be able to treat them all at Care for Change, but we can help everyone. We may not be able to treat everyone, but we can help. And so, Mr. Davis, as you're dealing with the people that you're already dealing with, as you're dealing with those teachers at Putnam City North High School, and they speak to you about this young man and that young man, now Care for Change is a resource that can try to engage those young men and their families. That was something that we didn't do before. Everybody came into us and you had to have a criminal justice. No, we're changing all of that now. We're coming out to the community saying, listen, if you have a young man in your home, if you have a nephew, if you have someone, especially between the ages of 12 and 24, we're really pushing 12 to 24, but all ages. If you have a young man who has changed, their behavior seems to be different, engage them. Sisters, I know a lot of times you all try to force us to do stuff, but walk with us. Hold our hand, bring us in, facilitate, because a lot of times that's what it's gonna take to get some of these brothers in. Because they gotta see the love, they gotta see the love from the people around them. Because I'm all right, man, I'm all right. No, you're not all right. You're not all right from my perspective, so let's go talk to somebody. And so that's, Steve, why I'm so excited about making amends, because you all have already done the legwork. You're already out here working with the kids. I came out here and met some of them, and what was interesting, Steve, I said, how many of you all would like some help? Every one of them raised their hand up.
That's right.
Now, did they actually follow through? No, but the point is that they raised their hand and said, I would like some help. Yeah. And so this is just a continuation for Care for Change, Steve, for me to come back and say, Steve, man, we were working together a long time ago. You were doing good things then. We were doing good things then. Now we have this unique situation to where Care for Change has the opportunity to help some people, maybe some of the mothers. This is not just men. Some of the sisters, some of the families. And so that was the whole point of coming to talk with you at Believe Inc. to see how we can continue our collaborations. But Care for Change wouldn't have been able to do this a year ago.
So as we kind of come to a close here, one of the things I want us to touch on is training and raising black boys. How do we, one of the things that, without a doubt, I know that parenting matters. Parenting matters. Exposure matters. Showing love to boys, black boys matter. Some people, I've watched mothers who literally love their sons to death.
Literally.
They literally love their sons into incarceration. Well-intentioned mothers. And because many times fathers have simply deserted them for whatever reason they had. Talk a little bit about it. Me and you, we talk about this all the time in training and raising our black boys. What's the approach as a community, as a village, should we be taking?
I believe it should be based on a cultural context. You know what I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say that we should utilize our history, learn from what we've learned, all of the good things that we used to teach our children, like respecting your elders, not cussing in front of your elders, teaching a young boy to work. Work is you're a man when you got a job and you work it. And see, we need to redefine our definition of manhood. And so that's what we were doing with the book in terms of Dr. Naeem Akbar, New Visions for Black Men. You know, and so that's that book right here. And so with this book, New Visions for Black Men, Steve, we need to redefine our vision of a black boy and a black man.
Good.
Versus what the media
tell our own story.
We need to tell our own narrative. So
That's
when
it.
I came out to your class, Steve, I taught a Black History class.
That's right. For a
Called
whole week.
The Story of a People, because you know what, man? Most people don't realize that mankind began in Africa and that everybody's Africans. The kids was like, what? I said, just go look.
Yeah.
It's not even argued that people talk about Egypt is the birthplace of civilization. Well, Egypt is in Africa, but if somebody didn't tell you, it didn't register that your people are the original people.
Yeah.
You heard it, but it didn't register in your mind.
Can you imagine the hope seed that would be planted in black children if that was part of the curriculum in public schools? Do you understand the change and how that would change the direction of public education in our country?
That young white teacher would have some tools that could be utilized, but you know why she don't have any tools? Because they cheated everybody.
They cheated everybody.
For instance, let me give you an Oklahoma one.
Yeah.
I was taught in Oklahoma that there was something called a Trail of Tears, but they never told me why they were crying.
Woo!
They told me that there was a Trail of Tears, and they brought all the native people, and black people too, by the way, came up to Oklahoma, but no one ever talked about why they were crying. Forced displacement. They were taking their land and moving. Okay, so no one wants to tell the story or the history, so white people grow up like black people, ignorant to the truth, which is why you see some of the behavior that you see now is pure ignorance.
Pure ignorance.
Ignorance. But if you know someone is ignorant, what do? You understand that I'm dealing with an ignorant person. Let me stay focused over here on what I need to do. And going back to your question, what I need to do is build a new vision for black men. You got to be employed. You got to take care of your woman. You don't curse. You don't curse in front of your There are certain things that we could teach these boys, particularly while they're hungry now.
Yeah,
while
they're hungry for sure.
And so you're doing it in high school, Steve. We should have a program.
We're doing it in high school and middle school now.
Oh, you're in middle school now.
We're high school, middle school, elementary school. This year, we're at Two Lakes Elementary School and Wiley Post Elementary School, 4th and 5th grade, because we understood that we have to start earlier planting the seed of hope and dreaming in our boys earlier.
So let me share this with you. So what happens to the grown man that learns the same thing? See, when you study the history of Malcolm X and those people who followed Elijah Muhammad, they were taught those things as grown men in prison. And so knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power. And so I believe that one of the first things we have to do is we have to start to tell our story everywhere we can. We can't expect the school system to tell the story because they've already shown you they're not going to teach it. And if they did teach it, they will tell you that we were slaves, Martin Luther King had a dream, and President Barack Obama became president, and now we're here. No, versus this. You come from a great and powerful people. The original people of the world were African. Everybody came from Africa. You, despite of all of these bad things that have happened to you, young men, your people are still standing. You're still strong. You are a warrior. You come from a great people. That's empowering versus you are a slave or you are a prisoner and those things. And so my psychology, my psyche, if you want to, my spirit will be more powerful and more strong if I think highly of myself. And me thinking highly of myself has to come from a different story than they've been telling us.
And that's the key to making of men, is we build young men to think highly of themselves. Expectation, mediocrity is not accepted. Failure is not an option. When we come in, we talk about dreaming dreams so big that they scare you.
So let me connect that to Care for Change. See, so you're telling them to dream big. You're telling them those things, and we're saying, see, so you're not depressed. You're just dealing with what happens in life. And what this is really about is managing your feelings, your thinking, and your feelings, young man. And so making a man is doing that, so we can now say to them that, yes, son, you are feeling this way, but let's look at why you're feeling that way.
That's right.
And what can you do about it? Because that's the key. And what can we do about it? Because now we're teaching them to master self, to depend on self.
And brother, as we close this, that is so key, is the mastering of self. And that's what this is about. This is about as men, as black boys, that we take responsibility for our lives, that we take responsibility for our community, that we understand that institutionalized racism is real, but that is not a excuse for failure. Matter of fact, it is a reason to become great.
Excellent.
That's what this thing is all about. So when we start looking at the achievement gap, when we start looking at distance learning and how that's going to impact, you and I and many other educators understand that black children are already behind. The achievement gap is huge already. After this whole COVID and distance learning thing, we need to understand that achievement gap's going to widen, but that's why it's so important that we have this conversation now, and those people who are out there who are pastors and teachers and community organizations that are watching can start thinking about how do we intervene now?
Be proactive versus reactive. How do we get involved on the front end, Steve?
That's it.
We know it's going to happen, but see, here's the thing. Our community generally waits till after it's over.
Till after it's God.
And so this
sick.
is let
me
already
say this.
Sick. I ain't much, as they say, but I will spend all my living days trying to fight this because it's so bad now. Things are worse than they were 20 years ago when I was first starting to get into education and do these things. And I have a PhD in education from OU. By the way, I only have one. I got to say that, Steve, because I don't want to be like Dr. Umar and people want to take me to court. I have a PhD from the University of Oklahoma. You can go check it out. You'll see it. It's there. And so, but I do want to say that, Steve, is that at the end of this, man, I'm here because you are doing work. you are doing things. I'd like to say to the community, if you got a program in your church, if you're doing something in your fraternity, if you're just doing something as an individual, give me a call at the number 405-524-5525. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just need to try to find some people that's willing to work, that's already doing the work, and we will try to provide you some support. That's what outreach is. Mm-hmm. We don't need to go reinvent the wheel. And so, Steve, I hope that, in the future, I'll continue to come back and see you. But community, there's no reason for you to be in your home feeling distressed, feeling anxiety, having all this anger, and not doing something about it. That's the one thing I want to leave you with. It is a choice. You can choose to feel better if you want to.
And let me say this, thank you, Doc, for coming on. And I want to say this to the community. These conversations we are going to be intentional to be very vulnerable and transparent. My goal is to empower not just Black boys, but to renew, rekindle, and reconnect our community. And that means that we have to be willing to have the difficult conversations. That means that we have to be willing to work with some people we may have some personality differences with. That means we may have to put some stuff behind us and forgive each other so that we can come together for the greater good, the collective, the village. That's what this is all about. That's what making of men is all about. And so, my friends, I'm looking forward to you joining me in this movement, this work, as we rebuild our community, as we actually make Oklahoma great. We call it the great state of the great state of Oklahoma. Well, we've got to put the intentional work in to do that. If America is to ever be great for the first time, we have to be willing to come together as humanity, Black, white, whoever, and believe in all people, to believe that all children can learn regardless of their zip code. What type of country do we live in when your zip code determines the success you have? What type of country do we live in when we as a Black community cannot look each other in our eyes and admit when we're wrong, say we're sorry, and continue to build the bridges? Hey, my friends, as always, serve, care, and love. Enjoy your day.